Welcome to our webinar about the state of supply chain disruption and a look ahead. This event is organized by the European American Chamber of Commerce, New York. My name is Yvonne Bendinger-Rothschild. I'm the Executive Director of the EACCNY, and I will be your host and moderator for today's event. Our discussion will offer an update on the state of supply chain challenges and how to prepare now for the next major crisis. Our experts will discuss what needs to change in global supply chain planning and how to prepare effectively for the next global crisis. We will take a deep dive into the dynamics of supply chain operations in the pandemic's aftermath and offer a look ahead and concrete steps companies can take to update their infrastructure to future-proof their systems and operations. Our panel includes Gaurav Chabra. He's the Managing Director at AlixPartners. And Gaurav implements high impact and sustainable margin and SG&A programs. In his role, he focuses among the other issues on strategic sourcing, gross margin, operating models and organizational designs, services and product margins, and post-merger integration. Before joining AlixPartners, he was at General Electric in operation, financial services, acquisition integration, e-business, Six Sigma across the United States, India, and Japan. We are also joined by Shanella Ratchanayan. She's a trade economist and in charge of global research at HSBC. And Shanella joined HSBC as a trade economist. Prior to that, she worked on a range of trade policy issues. Before that, she was an economist at the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We're also joined by Rupert Schlegelmilch. He's a director at the European Commission, Directorate General for Trade. Rupert studied law and political science in Freiburg and Berlin and started his career at the German Foreign Service and then moved on to the European Commission, Directorate General for External Relations, where he worked on World Trade Organization matters. With that, let's dive into the conversation. Shanella, do you want to set the stage and just give us an overview of where we are on supply chain and how you think that trade volumes are going to develop in the next couple of months?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Yvonne, and it's great to be here. I mean, as most of our audience will know, COVID resulted in a very deep trade shock. There was disruption on both the supply side, but also on the demand side. And even prior to COVID, international trade was having a bit of a rough time. You know, there was a lot of trade policy uncertainty with US-China trade tensions, Brexit uncertainty, but also trade tensions along other corridors. So it was a time of a lot of uncertainty and turbulence. But having said that, and despite all the disruption, you know, global goods trade has actually performed very well. So there was a very strong recovery in global goods trade volumes in the second half of 2020. That continued on into the first half of 2021. At the moment, global goods trade volumes are about 8% above what they were pre-pandemic and about 6% above what they were in 2020. So a very strong recovery on the goods front, a bit of a different picture for services trade, which has obviously been impacted by the collapse in international tourism. So a bit of a two-speed recovery in overall trade there. Looking ahead, we do expect this uneven trade recovery to continue. We're expecting a bit more of a moderation in global goods trade, particularly as movement restrictions lift and consumers start spending a bit more on services. But even then, the recovery amongst countries is likely to be quite uneven. You know, some countries like China, they're already back to their pre-pandemic export levels. For others, mainly advanced economies, it might take a bit longer to get there. And of course, there's ongoing supply chain disruption at the moment with port congestion. Supplier delivery times still remain extremely extended. So a lot of challenges yet to the trade recovery.
Yeah, thank you for that. Rupert, how do you see this from your point of view? How do you see the development?
Yes, thank you. No, I think I can fully agree. We have the same assessment. The WTO and others have come up with figures which are actually very encouraging. You might want to add it's less so for some of the developing countries. I mean, China is obviously doing very well. Most advanced economies are doing very well. If you take a bit of holistic pictures, I think the less developed countries have a harder time to get back to the pre-pandemic level on trade. And of course, in services trade in particular, if you don't look at goods, but if you look at services and also the flow of capital, all of that is coming back strongly, maybe not as strong as goods, but still, with the exception, obviously, of movement of people, of services in tourism, where there's a lot less, which you see less interconnectivity, if you wish. If you define connectivity as goods, services, capital, and people, as we used to do, because that's a single market model, you have that particular chain still being very weak. But I think we also see that this is not over. Your question mark in the title of this seminar shows how quickly things can reverse. Omicron was a shock that nobody had seen coming. Thanks God, it won't be maybe as bad as we thought at some stage. Port disruption, infrastructure problems, which are still there, they will continue. And some sectors, and the talk of the town is of course the chip sector, but other sectors also who are less visible, some of the raw materials, magnesium, for example, you have dependencies, which mean that if some parts of the supply chain don't work, for magnesium, it's, for example, closure of production sites in China for a number of reasons. You can very well soon get quite disruptive effects again. So it's not over. And part of the seminar, we also discuss what is the right policy response in this very uncertain environment. It remains very uncertain.
Yeah, on that note, port congestions on one side and raw materials on the other side. Gaurav, what are you seeing companies struggling with, and how are you advising them, to address this?
Yeah. So, for a lot of companies that we've been working with since the onset of the pandemic, gave a bit of a hall pass to a lot of companies in terms of their ability to manage their supply chains at a granular level. And demand really outstripped, supply to a great degree. And so growth tends to hide some inefficiencies in how these supply chains are being managed by every step of the supply chain. And towards the end of 2021, as companies entered into the 2022 budget cycle and the planning cycle, they almost universally have been trying to face the question of what will growth look like, right? If a company that grew its year-over-year demand by 25% during the pandemic, owing to fiscal stimulus and government support and just demand for everything from auto parts to beauty products, what does 2022 hold? And a lot of companies have been wanting to temper down their growth forecasts, and therefore are now faced with all the escalation in prices that they've been encountering over the past 2 years, and a compression of margins in their budgetary planning cycles. So what's happening across a lot of companies that we are working with right now is a lot of work on deconstructing the various parts of their supply chain, looking at the sort of the true should cost of the entire supply chain for products and services that they land in that they actually deliver. Actually gaining a deeper understanding of the raw material ingredients that are comprising their product set, and figuring out how do they buy those from the most efficient participants possible. And then the last thing I'll say is that, to my point of growth hides some evils, is there's been a tendency in the entire supply chain to just pass on the cost to the next leg of the supply chain. And all of that over the last couple of years has resulted in the consumer price index and the inflationary conditions that we've seen. Well, in a 2022 where demand may not be as strong, as 2021 and 2020, that implies that the whole price taking and price passing on nature of what's happening needs to be stopped, needs to be curtailed. And the more efficient players that have actually managed their supply chains will be the ones to actually prosper, while the rest of them will face margin compression in this year, more than likely.
Yeah, we've hit, it's an interesting point that, yeah, two interesting points that you're making here. One is, I mean, I talked to some of our members and they said, I mean, there is some price elasticity, but, you know, only on higher priced products. Other products, there is no price elasticity. And then, you know, they try to eat the increase in cost to them on some products and then laid it over to the customer on others during the crisis. But what I think is interesting is this whole you know, disconnect between, on one side, companies forecasted you know, less growth and adjusted their internal planning based on that. And then obviously manufacturers for their raw materials adjusted their production for, you know, due to the lack of orders, but also, you know, issues with production, you know, people not being able to get to go to the production site, etc. And now we have this massive clog in the system. When do you think the pressure is going to be easing? Is this kind of like moving itself through the system, or and I would love to hear Shanella on that as well, because she's doing research on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a very challenging question to answer. You know, the crystal ball is extremely clouded at the moment, but our view certainly is that there should be some relief in logistics pressures in the coming few weeks, so after the Lunar New Year, because that's given a bit of breathing room to the ports, particularly along the west coast of the US, to kind of catch up with some of that cargo clearance, and shipping lines are looking to use this time to also restore their schedule reliability. But then just given that supply delivery times are still extended across the board, even though there have been some signs of improvement recently, it's particularly pronounced in the technology sector, but also across a range of consumer and industrial goods as well. I think, you know, trade disruptions will only start to ease a bit more broadly in the second half of this year, and then even then it would take many months for the supply chains to fully normalize. So then we're in a situation of 2023, and add to that, you know, there's pent up demand for certain goods, so that could come back, that could exacerbate existing disruptions. Plus, some companies are looking to hold a bit more inventory. The inventory restocking cycle in many advanced countries still has some way to run. So there's still some strength there for goods demand over the course of this year, all of which could be further exacerbated by the spread of Omicron, particularly in Asia, and given China's zero tolerance COVID-19 strategy.
Gaurav, do you want to add a comment on that?
Yeah, I think nodding? That, you know, the cloudy crystal ball, you know, analogy, I think is very much where a lot of companies, you know, mindset is. And while there's optimism for the easing out in the second half of the year, by no means are many companies planning for a return of sort of normalcy and, you know, in this year. We do think that the ability for that companies are re-examining their sales and operations, you know, planning, their S&OP muscle. The better demand forecast you can pass on to your supply chain, the better customer you are, the better you're able to demand more efficiency from your supply chain participants and sort of a fairer price, given that you've given every planning advantage. And while you may have a good planning process and a good schema, you're still dealt with the hands that you're dealt with all the things that Shanella mentioned, but at least you've gotten control of what you can control, right? And so the better you can be, in certain cases, if you're buying from a distributor, who's a mid-sized distributor and they may not have full sort of visibility and control of their supply chain, are there opportunities to go direct to manufacturer? We've seen there are manufacturers now in the supply chain that have distribution capabilities that are willing to work in certain cases with the end manufacturers of the products directly, whether it's industrial products or consumer products or services, to see how to make the entire supply chain more efficient. So yeah, I think I would concur with the fact that companies are viewing the cloudy crystal ball much like Shanella just described.
Yeah. We have a question from the audience, and I was actually going to ask Rupert about the policy side of this. So my colleague in Cincinnati, Todd Schwartz, is asking, one element of the Trade and Technology Council the EU and the US have launched is an effort to increase the resilience on strategic supply chain. Especially when it comes to computer chips. And he's asking, should we view the recent announcement that Intel will build a new chip fabrication plant in Ohio as an early win in this effort? And what steps the EU is taking to attract, support such investments?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you also for mentioning, for your colleagues to mention the Trade and Tech Council, which has a work strand on supply chain resilience, focusing on a number of key sectors in the beginning. We're looking at not only semiconductors, we're also looking at some of the pharmaceutical products and also on the solar supply chain, which is important for the green transition, if you want to call it that, as we call it in Europe. Obviously, on semiconductors, there is a clear understanding, or a clearer understanding, because reviews have taken place in the US, reviews have taken place on the European side, and the outcome of that is that we all think we have to be a little bit more careful in how the supply chain there is constructed. Ultimately, companies do these supply chains, not we. It's companies' decisions that have led to many of these investments go to certain parts of the world. But also, at that particular way, there was policy intervention. And it didn't fall out of the sky, if you wish, that one particular location, Taiwan, is so strong in manufacturing that had policy, if you wish, there were policy objectives behind that, and there was also, of course, support. Now, we believe in free markets and free trade, so we are also very careful to just go in and try to do things which sometimes is a waste of taxpayers' money. But on the resilience of semiconductors, we have a program which is called the CHIPS Act, like the US has one. It just came out, very new, which also has certain targets and will offer more support for the industries. And that is something which needs to be coordinated among the major players, so we don't have a race to the bottom or we over-subsidize in a way the supply chain. So it's delicate what is actually makes sense. On our side, it means, for example, looking at the state aid rules, we have very strict, which the US doesn't have, very strict limits on what state aid actually is possible. We will have to look at that. But I do think it's very important, and this is where the transatlantic point comes in, and maybe we also need to talk to the Japanese. We have to make sure that what we are doing is not distorting the marketplace in a way which is creating new problems. And I always cite the example of the problems we had in some other sector, which maybe was as prominent as semiconductors 30 years ago, which is aircraft. We have to be careful what we're doing here. But something will be done, and I think the investments which are taking place now are part of an effort. You mentioned the Intel investment in Ohio. We will see similar things in Europe, I think, rather soon, are part of that effort to be more resilient. Yeah, that's very clear.
Yeah. It brings up the next broader topic, the trade angle of all of this. What are the, and that's a question for both Shanella and Rupert, what are the trade forecasts, medium and long term, for some of the key countries?
Yeah, sure. So I can start with some of our forecasts, and I have to preface this by saying it is very difficult to forecast anything at the moment, just given the incredible amount of uncertainty. But overall, we are expecting exports of goods and services to grow by around 5.2% this year and 4.2% next year, and that follows growth of about 11% last year. So overall, this moderation is expected, just given base effects as well. In terms of the country or regional split, as I mentioned at the beginning, some countries, they're already back to their pre-pandemic export levels, the large goods exporters like China. For others like the US, Thailand, and the Philippines, based on our forecast, they could only get back to their pre-pandemic export levels in about 2023. And then for some other countries like the UK, Australia, France, it could take even longer. So there's still a lot of trade headwinds for some of these countries. You know, in the UK, there's still the issue of ongoing Brexit-related negotiations that's weighing on the trade outlook as well. And then in terms of kind of more medium-term export growth, some of the work that we've done suggests that the driver of trade growth in the future is really going to be emerging Asia. So the likes of Vietnam, Bangladesh, the Philippines, all these countries that should benefit from the ongoing reconfiguration of supply chains.
Rupert, what's your take on this? And also in terms of policy, what is the EU doing to support this and alleviate some of the issues?
Yes, first of all, I think we have this, again, we have the same figures that Janella. I think we know that it's not even the recovery, although overall I think it is reasonably good compared to where we thought we would be a year or 18 months ago. But it's not the same also for all the EU member states. Very clearly, we have countries who are doing better depending on the export mix and the way the trade has picked up in some parts of the world. What remains true, and this is why I mentioned developing countries, for us, 85 or 90% of the future growth is outside Europe. It's partly in the US, but it's even stronger in other parts of the world. So the fact that some of the developing countries, emerging economies, are not doing or not coming back as quickly also has impacts for us, because those are the markets of the future more than anything else. And this is why I always make the point that we're only doing well if these parts of the world economy are also doing well. What we're doing about it, well, our main task in this whole pandemic situation is, first of all, to keep the system running and not go back to protectionism. We had, I mean, the WHO and other international organizations take, numbers on how many more measures have come through the pandemic. About half of them have been rolled back, but the other half is still there. So that is for us, from a trade policy point of concern. There is a tendency, I think, to confuse resilience with reshoring or other things, which is not the same thing. And we are making this point constantly also within the EU, that autonomy or more resilience does not mean that you have to do everything yourself. Trade policy is actually there to make you more resilient in not having only one source, even if it's an internal source of supply, but diversify across the globe. That is actually the best way to be resilient. And we are using our tools that we have, including, of course, hopefully ratifying some of the free trade agreements which are in the pipeline. That is mainly Latin America, where we're losing ground as Europeans, in particular to China, and trying to also make sure that the debate that we had just had on semiconductors, that in this whole debate of supporting resilience, we don't go overboard with measures which distort trade. We still believe in competition, despite the more surgical approach to look at the supply chains. Doesn't mean that we will abandon our open free trade convictions.
Yeah, I mean, but then at the same time, you're dealing with, the forced labor issue, where in German it's called Lieferkettenrecht, where companies are required to make sure that forced labor doesn't go into their production. And I'm hearing from the US attorneys that the customs authorities are really going after that, stopping all tomatoes and silicone products going into the US. So is that protectionism, or are we just following? good policy?
I'll let the US colleague. The US has an executive order of many more of them than we have, so maybe they want to answer this question first. I have also a view on that.
Yeah.
So what I will tell you is that across the board, the visibility into ESG considerations is one of the dominant considerations across all companies, I would say. I was going to say most, but I'm going to say all companies. Depending on the kinds of products and services that they buy across trade boundaries, like for example, in the apparel industry, it has always been a very strong consideration. Now it's becoming a dominant consideration because that industry uses so much of manual labor. And over the past 2 or 3 years, there's been this, while economies track trade inflows and outflows at commodity levels and at macro levels, for clients that have, or for companies that have wanted to have clear visibility into their entire footprint in a very rapid way, with see-through capabilities as to 1 or 2 or 3 levels down, where do things come from that they're buying? It's been the lack of data availability that has been quite challenging. So as an example, a platform that we have commissioned, which is, we call it the Global Trade Optimizer, it is designed to track for companies at that component level their supply chain and their manufacturing footprint. And then from there, you're able to then look at it and study it in comparison to where is the global supply for those commodities mostly centered, so that you can try to adapt your supply chains to what's more the norm, and then you can consolidate it. You can consolidate it and control it better, right? If you have 100 touch points across a certain product set, it becomes that much harder to get your arms around ESG than if you had 40. And that's been sort of a focus of a lot of companies to try and consolidate and really understand their supply chains from a data perspective.
Yeah, and I think it's not only that. I mean, what's forced labor today used to be child labor and hazardous work conditions. And, we're addressing this in stages as policies develop. But Rupert, you wanted to make a comment on that.
Yes, I think the forced labor issue is not protectionism. Let's be clear and answer your question directly. I think what we're seeing, and I think that's a good thing, is that in this phase of globalization, there is just a lot more awareness of where does the thing come from, how is it produced, and what are the implications for the world for that. Maybe the first of globalization, everybody said, oh great, cheap stuff from China or somewhere else. Now the question is yes, but is it really the right thing? Some people might abuse it to say, well, then we better do it here where we can control it better, but I don't think that's the intention. I think the intention is really to make sure that we have more of the basic fundamental human rights respected in the supply chain. And that is something which we would always uphold. And that leads to supply chain traceability issues, as Gaurav just mentioned. If you really are serious about this, you have to trace things better. And you have to also responsibilize parts of the value chain. And all the debate is not, is it the right thing to do? The only thing that we had in the Lieferkettengesetz, you mentioned this German initiative, we will have a similar initiative in Europe on the European level coming out very soon. Is it the right thing to do, but is it manageable for smaller companies, or does it just kick them out of the supply chain? That is really the question. Who has to prove what in the end? Who has the burden of proof? How can you make this into something which actually not only looks nice on paper, but works in order to improve the conditions and also show, and it's not only one particular country in the East, this is an issue which is a worldwide problem, and not only in the semiconductor industry, where there's so much focus lately because of the polysilicon and solar panel production in some parts of the big country in the east. But there is an issue with fisheries in Thailand. There is issue in Europe. European farming in some parts of Europe also criticized for the working conditions. So it's really a question of how do you actually implement these policies without bringing everything to a halt, and that needs more effort also from many of the suppliers, in particular those who have the means to trace. But the only thing I want to say, modern technology is a real help in this regard, because if you want to, and we are working in the Commission on pilot projects using blockchain and other things to have a secure, traceable, trustworthy supply chain. That will be the thing to do in the future. I think that it's going to come much more prominent in the future.
Yeah, we had a discussion on ESGs the other day, and the sentiment was that the customer and employees are asking for it, and with that, there's no way around it. Companies will have to, focus more on ESGs, and supply chain is an integral part of that question. We have a question on. I mean, it's a little bit tangential, but I think it's an interesting a question from the audience. Current supply chain disruptions in part have been cited by the Biden administration as justification for a bipartisan infrastructure law prohibiting non-US manufactured projects to be used in infrastructure projects in the US. The Buy America provision. Do any of you want to comment on that? I mean, I think it's an interesting question because we are seeing European companies in the Anteportas, looking to get involved in projects that they're seeing coming out of that infrastructure plan. Rupert?
Yeah, I think I probably have to take that question. And we have a strong view on this. We certainly are not happy about the Buy America policies. We don't have a Buy Europe policy, and infrastructure projects in the EU are open to American bidders. I think it is important to distinguish what these policies are trying to achieve, which is on the one hand, I think a misled belief that they create more jobs and better use of public money in the US. There are lots of studies out there which actually show you get a higher price and not a better product, and you don't really do something very useful for your overall economy if you do it like that. But it's a very attractive headline issue. Let's use our money for our people. Huh? But economically, it doesn't make much sense. And we've been trying very hard to impress on our US friends that it's one thing to maybe not allow countries who are not open not to participate because we don't have reciprocity. We cannot bid for a lot of products in China, for example. But if we are mutually open, generally, like the US and the EU, we should have Buy Transatlantic, not Buy America or Buy European. Yeah, you can have conditions, which we are also working on, to not be completely open and naive vis-a-vis those who don't reciprocate. But overall, in the US, EU contacts, we don't think this is a good policy. We will continue to say that publicly, trying to avoid that we are singled out or that we don't have access to these opportunities.
Thank you for that. On the subject of opportunities and innovation, so what are some of the how are digitalization and technical solution, tied into that? What go off? What do you see? Where do you see the opportunities to help? We already talked about blockchain in tracing supply chain. What else do you see your clients developing? What technologies do you see them developing to address supply chain tracking?
Yeah. So I'll talk about it as sort of a combined, people, process, and technology, because some of these things that I'm going to talk about are going to be viewed by many as, yeah, that's basic table stakes, but yet you'll be surprised as to the lack of overall, collective maturity on some of these. So it does take, it takes organization, people, it takes establishment of processes and data flows, and it takes the appropriate use of technologies. And by that I say, we have also observed many companies almost over investing in digital, toolkits, when in fact the answers were far more simple and far more evident. So I'll give you a couple of examples, right? For companies that are consuming, products that are bought by them from various, downstream, participants in the supply chain, it is becoming important for them to go and understand the upstream, nature of the commodities and the raw materials that went into the production cycle of what they got. Because that kind of study and that kind of analysis, tells them where the opportunities are, right? And knowing where to focus your opportunity or your lens is really important, because if you try to do it for your entire supply chain at the same time, you could be swimming in data and information, and it'll take you weeks, if not months, to get out of that sort of, now what do I do, right? So having that ability to rapidly, in a matter of, a 3-week assessment of figuring out what are the needle movers of your entire supply chain cost structure, of your supply chain inefficiencies, that you can focus on for improvement is an important, people, process, and technology and digitization, dimension. Once you know where to focus on, and you're able to sequence it and say, I think that for this cycle, I want to really focus on resins, because if I get my resin spend upstream under control, that drives an outsized value to the overall cost of my supply chain. Now you know what to start doing, right? And you need to start thinking about, am I buying my resins from the right country? Am I buying it from the right, portions of the supply chain? Am I buying it from the most efficient, resin, manufacturer and distributor, chain? And so it's the use of appropriate, data and technologies to let you know where to focus, so that you can focus on them, and then you can follow it up with the appropriate contractual structures, right? So if you have a contract where you were buying a certain component, and now you want to index that contract because to a resin-based, index, then you're actually paying fairly for when the commodity index goes up. Sure, but when it goes down, you get the downstream benefits. There are a lot of contracts out there in the market that are not appropriately indexed, that are causing sort of, unjustified, price increases to be passed up and down the value chain. So we're seeing the use of technological and people and process and contractual mechanisms to get your arms around those kinds of matters.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but how easy is it really to adjust your suppliers, or for the suppliers for your raw materials? If the price goes up on one end, how quickly can you realign a supplier?
Yeah, so it's not immediate if you want to realign your supplier, but if you don't start today, you're not going to see the benefits in the second quarter or the third quarter, right? Because so the first thing to do, and this is what we always tell our clients, right? For now, for this month, just figure out where should you be focusing and whether you need to realign your suppliers or not, right? If you feel that you've got visibility and you don't want to invest in the time and the switching costs, then work with your supplier to help them be more efficient. In some cases, it may be that your supplier is buying more inefficiently when, like, together, by collaborating with them, you could together buy differently, and then both of you reap the benefits, right? So if you have a fair and a trusting relationship, then leverage that rather than being, all right, well, I'm going to move off you. But if you find that your suppliers aren't responding in a forward-leaning manner, then move you must. And so it's better to sort of swallow that bitter pill and go through the time and effort, because that then will be a gift that will keep giving you, you know, into 2022 and into 2023. And frankly, a lot of this should have started with a lot of companies a year and a half ago. Like, some of them did, but far more companies are doing it today, just given the length of the uncertainty and the length of what Shanella talked about with the cloudy crystal ball.
Yeah, interesting. Shanella, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what Gaurav was saying about the digital technologies. You know, we've done a little bit of work about the Internet of Things in particular, so IoT. It's by no means a new technology, but we do expect it to kind of increase in importance in the wake of the pandemic, because these sorts of technologies can afford a lot of benefits to businesses. For example, you know, things around predictive maintenance, but also just give them greater visibility of their supply chain, and especially around inventory management as well, which is something that has been really badly affected by all the supply chain disruptions. And already, you know, a lot of companies are using this type of technology, but of course, the data localization laws have to be correct. There has to be, in some respects, the free flow of data. If you're talking about, you know, shipping companies using IoT technologies and moving around the world, so essentially the ecosystem has to be right for these technologies to really take off. But once they do, you know, they can certainly reap a lot of benefits for businesses. And, you know, we even spoke about the ESG considerations, and these types of technologies, in addition to blockchain, they can certainly help as well, again, with the monitoring of, you know, emissions from factories. They could help businesses essentially optimize their production and their operations.
Yeah, it gets me right to, I mean, AI. Also, I mean, we have huge amounts of data, you know, the artificial intelligence needed to effectively analyze that. I mean, and I'm glad you mentioned it, Shanella, there's obviously a policy angle, you know, where there's data, there's regulation, or there should be regulation. Rupert, do you want to have a comment, share a comment on that?
Yeah, well, I guess your question is about the data flow issue and how that is difficult enough transatlantically, unfortunately. But let me just comment on one or two things. One word on what I just heard from my co-panelists. I think you're looking at this from the micro level. What has a company has to do to make sure they have access to the stuff they need. I just want to come back to what we are doing. We're looking at this from the macro level. What does Europe or what does the US need individually to keep the economy going? And that is actually a discussion which is intensifying. We have started to look at a few of these strategic sectors, if you wish, on both sides of the Atlantic. And the only thing I want to share with you is that we think that the actual real dependency is very little. For many stuff, there is a supplier out there, even if an individual company doesn't have the access. But the real systemic problem is on very few products. I mean, in the crisis, we saw there were a couple of active pharmaceutical ingredients, okay, some equipment, personal protection equipment. And then there are some raw materials, lithium for the electric cars, magnesium I mentioned, and a few others, which might be difficult to get for all of us. But most of that, if you look at the company supply chain level, is not that sensitive. It just means you have to organize this. I want to echo what the panelists say. It's more a question of organizing yourself properly, diversifying yourself properly, than a real policies. I mean, there are policy issues, but they're very limited. There are not that many products which are systemically or structurally difficult to get. And most of the dependencies are with China, Brazil, and Vietnam. In the case of the EU, we have identified the countries where you have to work on. And of course, the China dependency, I don't want to belittle the point. That is, of course, a huge political question given the tensions we have in the system. But still, for many of the issues, the remedies are available for companies to also diversify their supply chain. Sorry, I was not answering your question, but I think it's important maybe also to point that out, that there is not a huge, big problem in the world. It's really very targeted, and you have to go at it surgically. From our point, from the authorities' point of view, if you wish, or the trade policy point of view.
You're absolutely right when it comes to general supply chain issues that we're dealing with right now. I mean, there are, you know, that there's this famous example that I like to share, me having to go during the height of the pandemic to 3 different stores to find a gallon of milk. That's a whole different, that's not a, you know, a China or what have you issue of raw materials or cows not being around. This is really just a sheer, you know, logistics issue. We have actually an interesting logistics question that I would like to throw in before we move on to a look ahead. What role will the Panama Canal play in capacity, you know, adding capacity to that flow of goods? Does anyone want to comment on that?
I mean, I would just add that, you know, any sort of diversification again in trade routes would certainly help. So whether that's the widening of the canal or even just opening certain ports in other countries, all that will certainly help, especially with what we saw with the grounding of the ship in the Suez Canal. So and that then caused ripple effects through the supply chain, and that came at a very bad time where things were already highly disrupted. So any form of diversification, expansion of capacity, will really help to mitigate future trade disruptions.
Yep, that Panama Canal and opening up the Arctic, you know, along the same lines. But yeah, this is definitely a 2-pronged issue. A look ahead, risk mitigation strategies for businesses. I mean, we already talked about nearshoring, reshoring. Canada is showing itself as, or presenting itself as a source for a battery production, as a good ground for battery production. What you know, what are we looking at? You know, also, I mean, first of all, in the US on the ground, in Europe on the ground, and then for Rupert to comment in terms of collaboration between the EU and the US. I don't know, Gaurav, do you want to start? US on the ground, what are we seeing?
Yeah, so, you know, I'll to your point about risk mitigation, you know, it's kind of interesting that 3 years ago, the supply chain organizations across companies were sort of those hidden, understated teams of people that would keep the trains running, and as long as the trains ran, you know, figuratively speaking, everything was okay. And those teams have now been in the spotlight for 22 months straight. In many cases, those people that work in those teams are sort of, you know, quite fatigued just because of the day-to-day, week-to-week, and month-to-month just battling through the table stakes of getting supply, right? And getting it through ports, getting it through, you know, on trucks, getting it through distribution centers, getting it through fulfillment centers, meeting SLAs, handling returns, you know, and so on and so forth. It would be a shame to, once this ends, because this too shall end, as most things in life end, this phase too shall end eventually, to let the opportunity to build resilience get missed out. And by that I mean the biggest thing you can do from a risk mitigation standpoint, in addition to any short-term, you know, measures and short-term reconfiguration, is to actually take a long, systematic, and deliberate multi-year view by establishing what does true north look like for my supply chain from an end state perspective over a 3-year period. What do I need to do organizationally? What do I need to do in terms of my team and where they are located? What do I need to do in terms of my technologies that I deploy and my data availability and my governance with ESG considerations in mind? And what does that look like? And then deconstruct that true north into step-by-step chunks. What do I need to do for the next 3 months? What do I need to do for the 6 months after that? And plan it out to and commit to building sustainable and resilient teams and the utilization of technologies and data that can support your true north supply chains. That is what we are really encouraging our clients to do, because it's very easy to, when all this ends, to say, okay, well, that happened and now it won't happen till, for the next 100 years. The last pandemic was 1918. This one was, 2020. We're now good for the next 100. Well, I think that would be a missed opportunity and very sad if that were to be the point of view. So.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. The next pandemic is closer than we think. We just don't know what it's going to be. Shanella, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with Gaurav. The worst thing we could do is not take any learnings from this and just carry on business as usual. But within those kind of risk mitigation strategies, there are a few things that businesses could look to pursue, and indeed some of them have already been doing this through the pandemic. So we spoke about diversification. That's really important, and trade deals are a really good way of doing this and making the most of the opportunities presented by trade liberalization opportunities. But also things like nearshoring. And, sometimes that might sound a little bit protectionist, but there is some value in having your suppliers a bit closer, or at least the option to then have that flexibility in your value chain to be able to switch when things do get quite bad. And some companies were a better place to do this during the pandemic. And then also a strategy around vertical integration, for instance. Now, again, that could be quite costly, but again, it's all about securing your supply chain, ensuring that you can have that flexibility within it, and just the ability to control where things actually come from and then where things are going. So yeah, plenty of strategies businesses could pursue, some of them more costly than others, but I should also say these aren't mutually exclusive. So you could be diversifying your suppliers at the same time as you're building up some production capacity closer to home.
Yeah, I can see that. Policy side, Rupert, what is the EU working on in that regard? I mean, there's only so much influence you can take on you can have on business decisions, and this is more a business decision than a policy question, clearly.
Yes, but I think what we can do is create an environment where businesses can actually apply these policies, and that means first and foremost, as I said, keeping the trade flowing, not intervening heavy-handedly without having really a really good reasons. We have the Defense Production Act in the US. We have also looked at the beginning of the crisis at what Europe can do. We had a notification system for exports for some of these things. So the whole question of having trust in each other, that we can actually supply each other in a crisis, is key here. If we all shut down in a crisis and think we can do it, we have to protect ourselves, that will not necessarily lead to more resilience. But it has to have a certain amount of understanding on how the tools that we might have for the extreme cases should be applied or should not be applied, in particular vis-a-vis each other. It might be a very different context with a state-run economy, which has other means and other objectives than getting resilience into the system. That is what we can do, which we are doing. We are discussing the whole issue of where are the vulnerabilities, what is actually the right policy response if you see that you are so dependent either on the EU or on the US. How complementary can we be to be resilient, and how much do we really have to do things our own? And where to put the cursor on some of the export restrictions, which in crises seem to be an attractive tool, which basically probably don't necessarily have the right result if you think it through. So that kind of discussion we can do. So we have the enabling environment for the supply chain actors, which are the companies, to actually make use of the opportunities also at reasonably cost. Let's be honest, there is also a question of cost. resilience has a cost. Reshoring has a cost.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And that's, I think, also what the Trade and Technology Council is working on, to find ways to be resilient together. Last topic for today. What are we expecting the long-term effects, or actually I should say medium-term effects of climate change to be on operations, logistic, and resource shortages? I don't know who wants to start with that, because this is a this is a major issue that needs to be factored into this conversation. Janella, do you want to set the stage for that? You have the sun, the earth, and the moon behind you.
That's right. Yes, we already spoke about the ESG considerations through the supply chain, but this is where policy can really help, especially with things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism as well. But then that in turn could have trade implications, because it could alter where companies end up sourcing some of their inputs from. And then I would also say, just on the logistics side, carbon emissions is and greenhouse gas emissions is a very key issue for the shipping industry. And now, we're forecasting really strong trade growth in coming years, even though it is moderating slightly, but trade volumes are set to grow. And so that's another challenge for the industry, particularly as businesses, their customers are, making the move to have net zero supply chains, and shipping and the logistics would play a huge role in this. And so certainly, again, regulation there can help, particularly with the type of policies coming out of the IMO, but there are delays in that. So again, you see certain economies, particularly the EU, press ahead with their own regulations on this, and that's all things that could really help to support the energy transition, but also help build those resilient supply chains to which being able to mitigate some of those climate change pressures will be a key part of.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Go off.
Yeah, so I think that's all been said really well. On the ground, there's been more encounter disruption because of climate change in the recent years than there has been in the many years prior, and I don't. It's sort of hard to explain why, or try to understand why, except that that's the case. Whether it's the freezes in Texas, or the wildfires in California, or the recent wildfires in the Boulder, Colorado area that has destroyed so much of the of the forests there. All of these impacts have exacerbated the issues that you talked about, that were more at a macro level. In some ways, I guess we could have prevented the Suez Canal getting blocked, or what from a policy standpoint we enabled the Panama Canal to do. But how you build response mechanisms to climate change situations is back to what kind of we call it a war room, right? And a war room is an operating mechanism to rapidly get the right people in the room together to make those kinds of changes rapidly, right? So organizationally, you can do some things to prepare. But let me pause there. Rupert, I know we're at 11. So.
Yeah. Yvonne, this is a really neat question. That's the next seminar. There's a lot of stuff I could talk about with climate, CBAM, and everything else. I need to really run. I apologize. Thank you very much. I need to log off. But this question was just too much for 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
I hear you, and it will be the next seminar. So. And Janella, go off. Any final thoughts before we close out?
I was just going to say thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Janella. Thank you, Rupert, and thank you to all our attendees. I hope you found it useful, and I was glad to be able to participate.
Yeah, same here. Thank you to all my co-panelists and to you, Yvonne. I will just say, on the trade front, there has been a lot of disruption over the past couple of years, but there are plenty of opportunities awaiting for the medium-term outlook.
Yeah, that's for sure. And so thank you to both of you. And this concludes today's webinar. And we will have a look ahead, actually March 8th, a live event in New York City on human rights, supply chain due diligence. We're also working on our quarterly European economic update. It will be either February 23rd or 24th. We're going to announce that in the next a couple of days. And we have another live event in mid-March, Pan-European Tax Update. Check the website for exact dates, panelists, and how to register. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much to everyone.